Defense Secretary James Mattis and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Joseph Dunford briefed the Senate Appropriations Defense Subcommittee on the military's readiness and the upcoming fiscal year's budget. Much of their focus was on the impact budget restrictions had on the U.S. military's overseas offensive and defensive abilities, many of them related to the 2011 Budget Control Act. This is about an hour and 45 minutes.
The Subcommittee on Defense Appropriations of the United States Senate will come to order. Today we are receiving an update on military readiness and defense budget matters. We are pleased to welcome to the committee the Honorable James N. Mattis, Secretary of Defense, General Joseph Dunford, Jr., Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The fiscal year 2017 Department of Defense Appropriations Agreement has been approved by the other body, the House of Representatives, and I look forward to our completing work on that bill in the coming weeks. We are well into the fiscal year, and members of the subcommittee understand the importance of enacting defense appropriations legislation. As we complete our work on the 2017 Defense Appropriations Agreement, we also recognize that a request for additional appropriations in fiscal year 2017 has been submitted to the Congress. We welcome comments from our panel and as well as on the submission for 2018. It's a distinct honor to have the Secretary of Defense before us in his first appearance as Secretary. I also am pleased to welcome back to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before the committee. We look forward to hearing more about your priorities and efforts to increase military readiness and strengthen the Department of Defense. I now turn to the Vice Chairman, Senator Durban, for any opening remarks he has.
Thanks, Chairman Cochran. I'm pleased to join you in welcoming Secretary Mattis, General Dunford. I have tremendous respect for both of these outstanding leaders and give special welcome to Secretary Mattis, his first appearance before the Defense Subcommittee. Our nation has been at war for nearly 16 years, and the toll of these conflicts can be measured in many ways. More than 6,900 Americans have given their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan, more than 52,000 wounded. Our VA clinics and hospitals are serving more than 2.5 million veterans of these wars. Our taxpayers have provided $1.8 trillion to support the men and women who continue to serve overseas. It's not surprising we find our armed forces are currently under strain. But the evidence is mounting that it's not necessarily a decade and a half of war that is straining our military, but instead a self-inflicted congressional wound called sequestration. Sequestration cuts in 2013 eliminated $35 billion from the Department of Defense base budget virtually overnight. The shockwave of these cuts, which were never, ever supposed to happen, rippled through the training, maintenance, and readiness of our military, such that the military services have estimated it will take until nearly 2020 to fully recover from sequestration. We could tick off through sequestration's impact, the jobs, and our economic growth just as easily, because it hit just as hard on domestic spending. The administration has proposed $30 billion in additional defense spending, $25 billion to build readiness, $5 billion to increase spending on Afghanistan and the counter-ISIL campaign. I have 4 concerns. First, the proposal appears to do very little to restore readiness of our armed forces in the short term. Congress has already addressed $5 billion of the requested funds in the pending defense appropriations bill. Of the remaining funding, only about $8 billion is for near-term training and maintenance. In addition, we are not being told that this package will accelerate the timeline for the services to fully recover their readiness. Number two, the $5 billion in overseas contingency operations funding is being requested without a strategy to support it. In fact, the President's new counter-ISIL strategy may not be presented to Congress until May of this year. Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, I hope you can provide insights on what this strategy may be. What are we getting ready for? What are the priorities? That's not a hard question. It's an important question if we are being asked to appropriate this money. In short, it's a readiness package the Department says won't improve readiness and a war request disconnected from a strategy. Third, the administration's package proposes $18 billion in cuts to non-defense programs to offset the increased military spending. The administration has provided no detail on these cuts, but we all know what's on the chopping block. The White House is already proposing extremely reckless cuts to agencies like the State Department for the next year, which would jeopardize our nation's ability to deal with crises without resorting to arms. I wish the White House had listened to then General Jim Mattis' views on the State Department. In 2013, as commander of the U.S. Central Command, General Mattis stated, quote, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition ultimately," end of quote. But the harm will go well beyond hurting our national security. Some of the cuts could cut into medical research, something that many of us on this panel feel very strongly about, education, and everything in between. Our armed forces depend on a healthy, well-educated American workforce to sign up and serve our country. Cutting these programs will ultimately shrink the pool of Americans who can serve in our military, making these proposals today, in the long term, very short-sighted. Finally, the administration does nothing about sequestration. If Congress enacted this package tomorrow as is, OMB has submitted it, it would trigger an immediate across-the-board sequestration of military programs. Can you believe it? More money triggering a cut. OMB is asking to spend more than the law allows for defense, but it didn't ask for us to change this underlying mendacious sequestration law. OMB is asking to spend more than the law allows, and we need to do something about it. Previous administrations did this frequently when they made these requests, but not this administration. President Trump's proposal is incomplete, and it really doesn't address this issue in a serious way. Mr. Secretary, General Dunford, we all recognize there are holes in our armed forces that need to be fixed. I hope you go further in your testimony to explain these. Congress needs to know why you think this is a spending package that needs to be passed. Considering the problems with this proposal, the cuts to domestic and diplomatic spending, the lack of a new counter-ISIL strategy, the modest funding for increased training, and the lack of any fix to sequestration, it appears that Congress may need to consider significant changes. And let me say as I close, one floor up, I am in the Judiciary Committee on a hearing with the Supreme Court nominee, and I'll be on the docket in just a few minutes. So excuse me if I am gone. I promise to return. Whether you want me to or not.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome to the committee witnesses. We appreciate your being here. We'll now hear from the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis.
Chairman Cochran, Vice Chairman Durban, distinguished senators, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of the President's request for additional funding and any other matters of interest to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I request the committee accept my statement for the record. Thank you, sir. As you know, the President is committed to strengthening our military. The security situation facing our country has become more challenging. The looming threats have outstripped the level of resources we have been allocating to defense. We in the Department are keenly aware of the sacrifices made by the American people in the form of the additional $30 billion budget request. We take seriously the responsibility to spend wisely this money to enhance the protection of our nation against emerging threats. We also recognize that hesitation now to invest in defense would deepen the strategic mismatch between our future security and the military means to protect our people and freedoms. Our military must ensure that the President and our diplomats always negotiate from a position of strength. Global threats require a global response, applying the full weight of our own and our allies' power, allies which are also increasing their defense outlays. Diplomatic solutions will remain our preferred options, but we cannot deny the role of our military in setting the conditions for diplomatic progress. Military deterrence is only credible if military strength is sufficiently formidable that allies can confidently align with us in tempering adversaries' designs. We must look reality in the eye. We see Russia and China seeking veto power over the economic, diplomatic, and security decisions of nations on their periphery. Terrorist groups murder the innocent and threaten peace in many regions and target us. North Korea's reckless rhetoric and provocative actions continue despite United Nations censure and sanctions. This situation calls for our department to maintain a safe and secure nuclear deterrent and a decisive conventional force that can also fight irregular enemies, since our military must be able to counter all threats facing us. I'm here today to request your support for the additional $30 billion request for FY17. General Dunford and I will outline what this additional funding will do for our nation's defense. But the reason we are appearing here cannot be considered in isolation. While some might prefer a larger amount, several compelling factors convinced us to limit the request. It is late in this fiscal year, and the $30 billion is the number we believe that we can execute responsibly. In concert with this budget request, we must also have continuity of effort that is not possible under another continuing resolution. Only an FY 2017 appropriations bill can permit us to spend the American taxpayer money judiciously and start us on the long road back to military readiness and ensure we can fight effectively. I must note there are specific readiness gaps across our forces, which I would prefer to address in closed session so as not to embolden our enemies. The request before you represents the first step in a three-phased, multi-year effort to restore readiness. Phase 1 is this year's budget appropriation, including the $30 billion request for additional appropriations for FY 2017, to get our aircraft back in the air, our ships back to sea, and our troops back in the field with refurbished or new equipment and proper training. We based this request on a realistic appreciation of the capacity we need to fight and win on the battlefield. Phase 2 starts with our FY 2018 budget request to balance the defense program. This funding will allow us to acquire capabilities we do not have or cannot execute this fiscal year, and it will allow us to adapt to the changing character of war by providing cyber, space, and electronic warfare capabilities. Phase 3 looks beyond 2018. We will work with the Congress and this committee to integrate our FY 2019 to 23 budget within a coherent strategy. To ensure our strategy is fit for its time, we have initiated the Defense Strategy Review directed by this Congress to reimagine our strategic concepts in all areas, and we will complete the review by this fall to ensure a new framework informs our long-term planning. I know we will have to make hard choices. With the help of the Congress, I believe we can build a force that is more lethal without placing undue burden on the American economy. This will require sustained commitment from the Congress in the form of additional funding and regular on-time budgets. Thank you for your strong support and for ensuring our troops have the resources and equipment they need to fight and win on the battlefield. I pledge to collaborate closely with you for the defense of our nation and to keep our armed forces second to none. And I will welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Joseph Dunford, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is here today, and we welcome you and ask you to make any opening statement.
Chairman Cochran, Ranking Member Durban, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join General Mattis in appearing before you And Chairman, I have also submitted a written statement that I'd request you accept for the record.
It will be printed in the record. Thank you.
I'm honored to represent your men and women in uniform, and it's because of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and your support that I can begin this morning by saying with confidence that your joint forces can defend the homeland and our way of life. We can meet our alliance commitments, and we maintain an overall competitive advantage over any potential adversary. And I think that's an important point to begin with, and a point that shouldn't be lost on our adversaries, our allies and partners, or on the American people. However, while we have a competitive advantage today, sustained operational commitments, budget instability, and advances by our adversaries have eroded that advantage. 15 years of war have also taken a toll on our people and our equipment. Many of our men and women continue to deploy as much as they are home. Similarly, our platforms, weapons, and equipment are showing signs of wear. In many cases, we have far exceeded the planned service life for our vehicles, our aircraft, and our ships. Additionally, 8 years of continuing resolutions in the absence of predictable funding has forced the Department to prioritize near-term readiness at the expense of modernization and advanced capability development. We now face what has been described as a bow wave of modernization requirements for both our nuclear and our conventional forces. Meanwhile, potential adversaries have accelerated capability development, and they challenge our advantage in critical areas such as space, cyber, electronic warfare, and missile defense. It's important that we reverse that trend. The FY17 budget request is a much-needed first step. It helps the Joint Force address our most urgent near-term readiness concerns by funding current operations, addressing personnel shortfalls, resourcing training, and improving our maintenance. The additional request for resources also allows us to procure limited quantities of needed equipment to fill holes in our deploying units. Looking forward in fiscal year 18 and beyond, sufficient and predictable funding will be required to fully recover readiness, balance our inventory of capabilities, and maintain our competitive advantage. Thank you once again for the opportunity before you this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your statement. Let me ask you about our timeline and what are the pressures that we face in bringing this bill to the attention of all of our members of the committee and the Senate. In your judgment, what is the impact? This is for both of you. What is the impact if Congress does not approve the additional $5.1 billion for overseas contingency operations? Would you have the funding flexibility to conduct an accelerated counter-ISIS fight, for example?
Chairman, obviously we'll keep the forces in the field at the top of their capability. It's not only a military obligation, it's a moral obligation, and we could continue the fight. The problem is it would eat our readiness again and would deepen the hole that we're in, leaving us in an even worse situation, and it will cost even more to get out of it in the future. We have done this for several years now where we've continued to maintain the operational tempo, but without the backdrop of sufficient readiness funds to keep the forces back here at home at the top of their game, and it's worsening as we go on. Let me pass this to the chairman for his thoughts.
Chairman, thank you. I think there's two things that we look to do moving forward. One is to accelerate our campaign, and the other is to position ourselves to seize opportunities. And from my perspective, not having the OCO money will restrict our ability actually to accelerate the campaign and seize opportunities. We'll lose some flexibility. As General Mattis, as Secretary Mattis has said, we'll make sure that those men and women who deploy in harm's way have the wherewithal to accomplish the mission. But what we won't be postured to do is have the flexibility needed for a very dynamic threat and enemy.
Mr. Secretary, what is your assessment of the Russian aggression in Europe and the investments that we will need to reassure our European allies of our ability to function?
Chairman, Russia has decided to become a strategic competitor with us. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, to try to achieve a veto authority over the diplomatic, economic, and security interests of the nations along their periphery. So what we have got to do is ensure that the NATO alliance stands firm, it stands united, and stands unambiguously for a unified response to any kind of Russian adventurism such as we've seen in Crimea and the Ukraine, and with the mischief they're causing inside the elections in Europe that are ongoing. If we don't have the funding to maintain the reassurance initiative, then frankly the reassurance goes away. It's as if we're denying a reality that has been pretty revealed to us over these last several years. So I strongly endorse the European Reassurance Initiative, and I noticed that the NATO alliance has reversed its reduced funding, and overall the funding has risen for the first time this last year. So they're also online to maintain their level of commitment.
I now recognize the distinguished Senator, Mr. Durban.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I asked my staff to explain this to me twice because I wanted to make sure I understood it. Under the Budget Control Act, if we give you, let's put OCO over here, if we give you $25 billion more in the Department of Defense in the supplemental request, the Budget Control Act will require the Department of Defense to do a 5% across-the-board cut in order to make up for that $25 billion that's being sent to you. That, of course, makes no sense whatsoever. I can't imagine that you'd want to go through that exercise. So my question to you is this. Did you consult with OMB before this supplemental request was made to Congress?
Senator, we consulted extensively with them on our requirements. The mechanism for how to actually address this is, as you point out, complicated, and I would take no issue with how you characterize the Budget Control Act and the effect of sequestration. I'm aware of it, Senator. It's not something I can give you a solution for from my position in the executive branch at the Department of Defense, but I share your assessment and I take no issue with how you've characterized it.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary, and I don't blame you for this. This is OMB's job, and I don't know why they're playing this game with us. They need to waive the Budget Control Act if they truly want to provide more money to the Department of Defense for the safety and security of the United States. And if they don't, I don't even know why we're wasting our time with this hearing. Secondly, let me ask you about the civilian hiring freeze announced by the President. This hiring freeze affects the civilian workers at the Department of Defense. We estimate there are 742,000 civilian workers, 1.3 million active duty men and women. On January 23, 2017, President Trump issued a hiring freeze of the federal civilian workforce at the Department of Defense. How has this hiring freeze impacted the department's day-to-day operations? What impact does it have on the resources you will have available when it comes to readiness and the investments which you believe are necessary for our national defense? And are we hiring contractors to avoid this freeze?
Senator, we are not right now hiring contractors. I think that would violate the spirit of the President's order. However, I've been given and I've passed delegated liberal exceptions authorities, waivers, frankly, in order to keep shipyard workers, aircraft depot workers on the job, everything right down to daycare workers so that our troops can drop their kids off and be at work on time. So we've had to do a rather liberal waiver policy in order to address this, and it so far has kept us out of any extremis.
I know a hiring freeze is a great headline. This is not the first president who's tried it. But when it comes to a hiring freeze in the Department of Defense, at the same time we're being told to give $30 billion more because we need more resources to get ready to protect America, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The civilian employees, I hope you will agree with me, are an important part of our national defense. And I'm glad to hear you're being given these exemptions. I hope that's adequate, and I hope that you don't turn to dramatically more expensive contractors to fill in the voids. Let me ask you this question. When I went to Europe a month ago to visit in Poland, in Lithuania, and Ukraine, they're very worried. They were encouraged by statements that you made and statements by Vice President Pence in Munich that seemed to give them some relief in their belief that NATO was still alive and well. You talked about Russian adventurism, or however you characterized it, and they live it every day. They can look across the border at the planned military exercise in September of 100,000 Russian troops in Belarus and see some real threats to the borders of the countries that I've just named to you. And so I want to know why in your request, supplemental request, there isn't money also being set aside, more money set aside for the European Reassurance Initiative.
Senator, we prioritized the request for what we could execute this year. That was one point. A second point is that, as you know, there are 4 framework NATO nations, the United States included, Canada, Germany, et cetera, that are actually mounting reinforced battalion combat teams to some of the nations you visited, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, to make a clear demonstration of NATO's firm and unified response to any further adventurism by Russia. This is a time when miscalculations can occur, and we need to make certain that Moscow does not miscalculate, and we believe we've led with the right sort of firm, unified action out of Brussels that permits us to send a clear and unambiguous message to the Russians.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Sure, thank you.
Senator, thank you. We now recognize the distinguished senator from Alabama, Mr. Shelby.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, we just have Mr. Secretary was a general, always a general, but we just have a few minutes here. But would you briefly sum up our strategic challenges, if you can, our challenges asymmetrically, and how do we meet them? You're in the right committee, and we've had a history of supporting the defense, and I believe we will here. But I think the American people really need to know the challenges that you face as our Secretary of Defense out there.
So I think the most important issue I deal with is how do we keep a high-quality force, all-volunteer force, fully capable of carrying out its responsibilities. The strategic challenges, I would lay them out in a couple different packages. One is where we have great powers, Russia and China, very different powers, adopting different modes, but challenging the international situation such as we've put together to create an environment for peace and prosperity. And you see it with both of their efforts to revoke or veto the security, the economic and diplomatic interests of nations on their periphery. In Russia, we see it with little green men and passing out passports to Russian-speaking people in other countries and undercutting democratic processes. In the South China Sea, we see China shredding trust as they adopt a tribute nation kind of approach where all other nations have to pay tribute or acquiescence to the more powerful nation, the larger nation. We also see in the case of North Korea and Iran a proliferation issue, one that has been delayed in Iran, but we see the reckless behavior north of the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula as unsettling the Northwestern Pacific, East Asia area. Then we deal with the terrorist threat, and this we're going to be dealing with for a long time to come. We're in an era of frequent skirmishing, but that would be in a thumbnail how I see the strategic challenges, sir.
What about the cyber challenge? That's something that we've got to get our hands on. If we don't, we'll pay dearly when we're not.
Sir, cyber cuts across all 3 aspects of warfighting. That's nuclear command and control, That's conventional warfighting, and that's irregular warfighting. Space operations, cyber operations, electronic warfare, these are inherent to everything we do today.
General, what are we going to have to do to keep all of our troops, when you say all, combat ready, whatever? You need flexibility. You mentioned this earlier, but you also need resources, do you not?
We do, Senator. There's a few things that in this budget submission begins to get after it. First of all, we have used our equipment at a much higher level than we had planned. And so we need to maintain it. We're short of spare parts. And one of the other critical areas we need is ammunition. You'll begin to see the services add people to reduce some of the stress I spoke about. We really do have many of our people that are home about an equal amount of time to the time they're deployed. I visited one U.S. Navy ship last September. They were underway in the previous 12 months. 70% of the time they were at sea because of their important ballistic missile defense capabilities. So it's an indicator of parts of the force that are really running pretty hard. The other thing, Senator, is, and we have asked for some equipment in this particular submission, in some cases, we don't any longer have the equipment to maintain, so there's literally shadows on the ramp. And so in addition to resources to maintain the equipment that we have, get the spare parts back up to where they need to be, have the ammunition we need for contingency response, we actually need to replace equipment. And we see that particularly in the case of the aviation enterprise, where units have fewer aircraft than they rate. That creates two problems. One is they don't have what they need to go to war. The other is they don't have sufficient aircraft to train, and so our pilots also have degraded readiness as a result of not having sufficient aircraft.
I guess the bottom line, we can't be accountable to the American people with a defense that's second to none on the cheap. We got to pay for it, do we not, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we do, Senator Shelby, and the bottom line is America can afford survival. My priorities going into the department are to strengthen the American military, to strengthen our allies so that the full burden is being carried by our American taxpayer, the American troops, and to reform the business practices so I can come in front of you and confidently say we're spending the money that you're giving, that the American people are giving us in a responsible way. And so we can't do it on the cheap, but we also owe you an audit of the Defense Department. We also owe you some very strong internal processes to make certain we're not wasting money.
Thank you.
The time of the senator has expired. The distinguished senator from Rhode Island, Mr. Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary and General Dunford. Thank you for your service and for your testimony today. And Senator Durban made two, I think, important points. First, with $18 billion in unspecified cuts to the domestic side of the ledger, how can we make a decision if we don't know what the specific cuts will be? And I don't assume you know either, but that's something that we would have to know before we could thoughtfully make I think, a judgment. And the second point is about sequestration. We're literally giving and taking simultaneously. And one other small point I make about sequestration is OCO doesn't trigger the cap. But once the cap is exceeded, I understand that OCO funds would also be subject to sequestration. So your ability to move money around even into OCO could be limited. But those two factors, unspecified domestic cuts plus a giving and taking because of no attempt has been made to deal with the issue of sequestration, doesn't undermine your credibility or seriousness, but it certainly undermines the proposal, I think, in terms of its credibility and seriousness. So having said that, let me ask a specific question. One of the issues that you have made very clear, Mr. Secretary, is that you've suggested that, not suggested, but directed that these programs be executable in this very short window from now until October 1st. What specific sort of benchmarks did you give out in terms of executability?
Sir, we had to analyze what we could actually get under contract and appropriately not just throw money at problems, but monitor to make certain it turned into a readiness result. And we had specific benchmarks. For example, I think we'll double the number of deployable Army brigades at top levels of readiness. We actually got into that level of detail to make certain what we walk away from here with, if you support it, will deliver a readiness that helps us should we have to fight.
Again, and this question for both the general and yourself, there are some things that just stick right out in terms of readiness. Flying hours, parts and equipment for platforms that you already have. And then you start moving into new platforms. You alluded to some of the new platforms. Can you give us an idea where that line is between near-term readiness, you know, flying hours versus longer term? We have to build a force up, which will take probably a year or more to recruit. And perhaps, General, you could comment.
Senator, thanks. I mean, we're at the point now, in my judgment, that we have deferred modernization to the point where, in some ways, there's a distinction without a difference between flight hours and new equipment. And I'll give you an example, Senator. I've asked around to each of the services for examples of why do we need new helicopters, why do we need F-18s, and how do I explain to the committee that these are directly related to readiness. And what you find is that a squadron, for example, a Navy squadron down at Naval Air Station Oceana that rates 10 aircraft, actually only has 5 ready basic aircraft in the squadron. So again, can't go to war with 5 of 10 aircraft, but as importantly, you can't get pilots to the right level of training proficiency on those 5 aircraft, which has 2 effects. One, a readiness effect. The other is, over time, it's a morale issue. We see the same thing with helicopters in the Army. So, Senator, I think what we're seeing now is, as a result of the last 5, 6, or 7 years, I have a much broader definition of readiness. And to me, it's about what actions are necessary to make units whole to allow them to be combat effective and deployable. And so today it's a combination not only of maintaining the equipment that we have, not only addressing the spare parts shortfall, but actually, and I call it shadows in the ramp, but actually now replacing shadows in the ramp where equipment doesn't physically exist in the unit at a material condition that would allow us to deploy it. And so both of those actions, in my judgment, are necessary now in 2017. And I think the consequences of not addressing at 17 because we don't realize an immediate effect in 17 simply continues what we've been doing over the last several years, which is push to the right our readiness recovery. So admittedly, some of these initiatives won't realize a readiness benefit until 2019 or 20, but if we don't take the action in 17, that will simply become 2021 or 22.
Thank you. Again, gentlemen, I think we do all appreciate the readiness challenges after more than a decade at war and constant effort, and we want to address those, but we have these huge issues of what's to pay for in terms of not only the $18 billion of domestic spending, but, you know, are we really going to pay for this? Frankly, we've been at war for now, what, 16 years, and we haven't devoted any revenue to significant revenue to paying for military preparedness, readiness, personnel, et cetera. And the other side is the sequester issue, which is hugely complicated, challenging, and could end up taking as much as it gives you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The senator's time has expired. The distinguished senator from Maine, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary General, first let me begin by thanking you both for your lifelong commitment of service to our country. It is much appreciated. The Navy recently updated its force structure assessment goal to 355 ships, which is a significant increase from the previous goal to address the increasingly complex military threats facing our nation today. In addition, there have been other independent studies by the MITRE study, the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, that have also recommended significant increases. Following up on the concerns raised by my colleagues, what impact does the Budget Control Act have on the ability of the department to fulfill the President's promise to build the larger fleet that the Navy and these other independent studies have found to be necessary? Mr. Secretary.
Senator Collins, I can find nothing in the Budget Control Act that that helps our national security, and you brought up one of the most direct impacts. It's all negative. I believe it also sidelines the Congress. I think it puts you in a spectator role when we need you in an oversight role in the department, because it's your knowledge of what we're doing and understanding the strategy that allows you to commit American dollars to the defense of this country. As it is now, we're all watching as this, I would call it near senseless approach to budgeting goes on its automatic pilot, and we all stand there mute saying there's no way you can dignify it. We are going to need to build more ships. We are going to have a more maritime strategy in the future. It's clear that this is the case. And right now, it does not help us at all. It hurts us in terms of readiness and in terms of long-term capability to defend the country.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. It is an abdication of responsibility, and I hope it's something that whatever the administration does, our committee deals with and the Congress deals with. General, Maine is home to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. That's one of our public shipyards, and it's been called the gold standard, which we're very proud of. And that shipyard, and indeed all of our public shipyards, have major infrastructure needs to prevent significant negative impacts to fleet readiness and operational availability over the next 30 years. It's my understanding that the Navy's developing a plan for shipyard dry dock recapitalization. Could you give us some sense of when we can expect to receive that plan?
Senator, thank you. I know, and I think you know personally, that both the current CNO and the previous CNO have made several trips to your state to fully appreciate this infrastructure issue you spoke about. And I think we all realize that the strength of our shipyards is going to be inextricably linked to the ability to do what you spoke about a minute ago, which is not only to grow the fleet, but to sustain the fleet that we have. I know Admiral Richardson is focused on doing this as soon as possible, Senator, and I'd like to get back to you for the record on exactly when he expects to complete that study. But we have had several conversations about this, and I can assure you within the Department of Navy, both for Acting Secretary Stackley as well as Admiral Richardson, making sure that our shipyards have the wherewithal to support the growth of the Navy and the maintenance of the Navy that we have is number one priority.
Thank you. General, international partners and allies on the F-35 program play a critical role in helping to drive down the costs of that aircraft, as well as ensuring interoperability with our NATO allies. Could you tell us where the program stands with our international partners, and can you quantify the role that they play in reducing the overall cost of the F-35 for our government?
Senator, you know, I can't quantify exactly the cost difference as a result of allies and partners, but I can absolutely state before the committee that there is a significant advantage to our foreign military sales of the F-35 in driving down the cost to the United States. I can also talk to, you know, we reviewed our national military strategy over the past year, and we said one of the key questions we asked is, what is the source of strength for the United States military? And the first source of strength from the strategic level was the network of allies and partners that we have developed over the past 70 years. And a key element of those relationships is interoperability, commonality of parts, commonality of equipment, and so forth, so that we can, when necessary, integrate our capabilities in a fight. And so for the two reasons that you've identified, making sure that our most capable partners have access to the F-35 and that we include them in foreign military sales is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the senator has expired. We now recognize the distinguished senator from New Mexico, Mr. Udall.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Mattis and General Dunford. Thank you for your time and thank you for your service. I've submitted additional questions to you for the record on some of the military bases and issues in New Mexico, and so we hope that you'll give us timely answers there. There are questions that are important to me, but I wanted to focus on one of the issues that Senator Durban brought up in terms of the war in Iraq and the war in Syria. The President is asking Congress for a defense supplemental appropriation for fiscal year 2017 and a significant increase in defense spending in 2018. And I want to discuss these requests in the context of our current war against ISIL in both Syria and Iraq. In the last couple of weeks, the American people have read public reports that additional Marines and other U.S. forces have been deployed to Syria, up to 1,000 troops. The American people are being told that they are there to help counter ISIL. To paraphrase St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the first and most important requirements to wage a just war is that the war must be ordered by a legitimate authority. Alexander Hamilton and other founders argued strenuously to ensure that this power was granted to Congress rather than the executive in order to prevent the President from engaging in risky overseas ventures. As you know, the responsibility to make decisions about war and peace is one of the most important powers given to Congress under the Constitution. When the Iraq War first began, we were not an invited force, but an invasion force that required an authorization for the use of military force from the Congress. 14 years later, we still have United States forces in Iraq serving in a train and assist role, and they have been invited by the Iraqi government to support its efforts to counter ISIL. And the 2003 invasion of Iraq required an AUMF specific to Iraq. But in Syria, the U.S. has not been invited by the government. U.S. military vehicles and heavy artillery have been seen in Syria, and it's easy to argue the United States has effectively invaded northern Syria, violating the sovereignty of a country in the Middle East, which is a de facto declaration of war. Secretary Mattis, are you concerned that Congress has not approved an AUMF specific to Syria, granting the President the legal power to invade Syria?
Senator, I would not characterize it as an invasion, but I don't want to spend time on that aspect. I think we have to play the ball where it lies right now. The clear and present danger of ISIS that bulldozed the border in their supposed geographic caliphate and actually removed the border between the two nations was a reality in terms of the war that we had to deal with. We could not draw that imaginary line in the midst of an enemy and say on one side he's safe, on the other side we can take him on. I think that what we've got to do is look at this changing character of this enemy threat, and I would take no issue with the Congress stepping forward with an AUMF. I think it'd be a statement of the American people's resolve if you did so. I thought the same thing for the last several years, I might add, and have not understood why the Congress hasn't come forward with this, at least the debate, because I believe it's a clear and present danger that we face. I've dealt with this enemy for many, many years. I don't patronize them. They mean every word that they say. So in light of that, the Commander-in-Chief, the elected Commander-in-Chief, both the last administration and the current administration, I think have a duty to protect the American people and what we stand for from this enemy.
Thank you very much. General Dunford, do you have a comment on that?
Senator, I do quickly. I've been participating in several reviews of this issue, and while we do assess that we have the legal authority to do what we're doing right now in accordance with the authorization and use of military force that was provided in the wake of 9/11, I agree with the Secretary, and I think not only would it be a sign of the American people's resolve, but truly I think our men and women would benefit from an authorization of use of military force that would let them know that the American people, in the form of their Congress, were fully supportive of what they're doing out there every day as they put their lives in harm's way.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have additional questions on what you would recommend in terms of limitations and things like that, but my time's up, and so I will submit those for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The distinguished senator from Missouri, Mr. Blunt, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. General Dunford and Secretary Mattis both, I want to talk about airplanes for a minute. We've talked about aircraft carriers. That's an important part of being ready. You have to have enough planes on those aircraft carriers, and I see in the supplemental that the Super Hornets have been sort of at the top of the non-requested list for a long time, are now on the requested list. I know there are a lot of people that argue that readiness issues need to be addressed by being sure that we have pilot training time and maintenance hours, but also we have to have a line of planes coming along with that. And just a response maybe on how important it is you have both the equipment and the training time that you need.
Senator, the Super Hornet, the ones that we are requesting restore squadrons to the full number of aircraft complement that they need to have in order to fight. But ultimately, we'll have a mix of Super Hornets and F-35s on the carrier decks. So this not only contributes to immediate readiness, it also contributes to the longer-term readiness of keeping the carrier air wings fully capable.
Well, I think the committee's been pretty strident, pretty effective for a while in making those planes available. But as I've talked to both of you about, if you really want them, it's important to ask for them and not say, here's what we'd like to have. We're not asking for it because we're pretty sure you'll get it for us anyway. But seeing that line stay open, really important. It allows the Growler plane also that's part of any future flying package to be there. I don't have a lot of time, so I think I'm going to move on to another topic, which is a bill that we had in our defense authorization bill last year that really would address the needs of families when someone's being reassigned, to create not just the option that you might be able to get a way that your family could stay a little longer at the post you're currently at or go a little earlier, but actually a requirement that if the person serving was willing to deal with their own amount of expense to either go early or stay, that the family would have an option that families now don't have. And, you know, I know that both of you believe that families are the backbone of the military. I'm hoping if we get that legislation in the bill again this time, that we'll have the support of the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs. There's no cost the way that bill is currently written because the person serving makes the decision that they can either find quarters available to a single individual as their family moves earlier, or they can find quarters similarly available if they move earlier, or they can simply just decide it's so important that my family be able to stay until my spouse's job transitions properly, my kids finish this year of school, or the reverse of that they do that. And I know, General Mattis, you and I talked about this, and you were immediately encouraging in your support of that kind of change. I'd like you both to talk about that.
Senator, we had a good talk in your office. I went back and checked on it. Apparently, it's not budget neutral because of entitlements, so we may have to come in and get legislative relief, which I'm fully committed to doing if that's what it takes, so we don't have to run two different payments to the person for maintaining two households. So I'm not certain why we need legislative relief, and I've got the staff researching it now, but I'm in complete agreement with the program. It's just how do we do it in a way that's consistent with your view of budget neutral, and we will get there.
And I'm sure we can get to budget neutral, and that if that's the kind of legislative relief you need, we'll see that happens. And General Dunford, just a quick story. I was hosting a breakfast for Fort Leonard Wood a year ago, 2 years ago, when I filed this bill, sat down at a table with General Savre and his wife and General Perkins from TRADOC and a retired sergeant major, mentioned I'd filed this bill. Every one of them had a story when this would have made an incredible difference to their family.
Senator, having executed, I think, in excess of 20 PCS moves and navigated my spouse's employment and education for our children and so forth, I do appreciate what you're trying to do here. And without talking about the specific challenges of this piece of legislation, I think allowing the services to have the kind of flexibility that you're suggesting would absolutely be helpful, and I know it would have full support.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. The senator's time has expired. We now recognize the distinguished senator from Vermont, Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mattis, and first time I've been able to call you Secretary and not General. Nice to have you here. And in general, my schoolmate, we were in different years, but we are both have degrees from St. Michael's and from Georgetown. And I know that in Vermont, they're excited you're going to be coming to St. Michael's next month. No, in May. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to put my full statement on the record, but I note that since 2012, the sequestration law has forced Congress to enact budget cuts in both defense and non-defense spending. It's going to have consequences for a generation. Today, only 1/3 of Army combat units are ready to be deployed. For 2 years in a row, the Navy's faced annual shortfalls in excess of $700 million in ship maintenance, which resulted in critical maintenance periods being canceled. But sequestration has produced terrible consequences for the average American as well. Infrastructure is failing, investment, job training, employment are down, education funding lags behind. That impacts our national security too. Failing infrastructure undermines our national security by weakening economic growth. It creates vulnerabilities in our bridges, our water systems, our electrical grid. We cut money in nutrition, education, research. That hurts us. It actually cripples our ability to provide our armed forces with the men and women they need in the future. Reduce funding for medical research, disease prevention makes us less safe. And slashing non-defense programs to pay for an increase in defense spending is not a solution. National security is not solely the mission of the Department of Defense. The President says he prefers hard power to soft power, but soft power is not weak or wasteful. Failing to invest in America or cutting programs worldwide that feed millions, prevent AIDS, treat tuberculosis, malaria, all the things we do worldwide. If we cut that, it makes the world less stable. I think it makes your job more difficult. Mr. Secretary, you've even said that if we do not fully fund the State Department, we should be prepared to buy more ammunition for the military. I don't think that's a trade you want to have to make. It's not a trade I want to make. So let me ask this. We know that not all national security comes from DOD. We have to have a strong economy, a healthy population to be secure. Could you both speak about why a strong economy is essential to maintaining a strong military? And what about non-military power, such as diplomacy or development? What part does that play in our national security? Mr. Secretary.
Senator, the engine for national security has always been our economy. A strong economy equates to a strong military, and history is pretty compelling. Nations that didn't keep their fiscal house in order, their economy strong, lost their military power. I'm here addressing a readiness issue when I came back to the department in my current role that is severe, and that is why I'm here today fighting for this budget addition, the additional $30 billion, $25 billion of which goes to directly to readiness. And in my role to keep the President and the Secretary of State and our diplomats always negotiating from a position of strength is an obligation that I carry. I don't take any issue with the way you've characterized the budget sequestration and the effect of sequestration on all of our spending. And I would add that we're keenly aware of the sacrifices made by the American people and the other departments in terms of providing the military budget that we're getting, and I owe you a good audit and gain your confidence that we're spending that money wisely. But right now, I think I want to make certain that we've got our diplomats in a position of strength when they negotiate in this increasingly perilous world.
Yes. The time of the senator is.
Oh, I know that. I didn't know whether you were going to let General Dunford answer the questions as asked to both of them. If not, I'll ask him to submit it for the record, and I'll also ask to submit a number of questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the distinguished senator from Montana, Mr. Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, thank you for your service as a son of a Marine from the 158th Rifle Company from Billings, Montana. My dad's very proud that I get to be in the same room with both of you and thankful for your leadership and service to our country, truly. Secretary Mattis, I want to welcome you especially as your first hearing as SecDef, and I want to invite you to come out to Montana and visit Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls. You'll see firsthand the hard work our airmen are doing to keep the Minuteman III at the ready. We're here today to discuss the state of our military's readiness, which many agree has been neglected over the past 8 years. I'm pleased to see President Trump's budget submissions have challenged the status quo and have caused us to refocus on what matters the most, and that's keeping Americans safe. Secretary Mattis, as you know, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana is home to 1/3 of our nation's ICBMs. Most of our current Minuteman III missiles have been in service for almost 50 years. While airmen have diligently maintained this aging system, we must field a modern ground-based strategic deterrent in order to meet 21st century strategic challenges. Some argue that modernizing our nuclear arsenal is too expensive, but as the CBO has pointed out, the entire nuclear triad accounts for just 6% of our total 10-year budget for our national defense. Secretary Mattis, how valuable do you consider a fully modern land-based nuclear deterrent in your arsenal to keep Americans safe?
Senator, the need for a nuclear deterrent to ensure those weapons are never used requires a triad. To determine what level a triad must be at, we have a nuclear posture review that's getting underway. But I would tell you that the land-based leg of the triad, the intercontinental ballistic missile, is a very sobering reminder to any enemy that would choose to test us that we could soak up an awful lot of their nuclear weapons in order to take out a single one of those silos. And as a result, it is a stabilizing influence to have the ICBM force fully capable in its deterrent role.
One of my favorite commander coins comes from Malmstrom, and it says, "Scaring the hell out of America's enemies since 1962." Which, I'm proud of the work that they do to keep the world safe. Continuing on nuclear deterrence, I'm concerned that the Air Force is no closer to replacing our Vietnam-era Hueys for missile field security response than it was when I met with Secretary James last year. As a result, our airmen will operate inadequate equipment yet another year. Secretary Mattis, if the Air Force is given the $1.8 billion increase you requested for aircraft procurement, when might we expect to see a new and more capable helicopter deployed to our missile fields?
Sir, I anticipate that the Vietnam-era Hueys will be gone and replaced by around 2021. That's my goal right now. I've got to get into the budget in detail and look at where we can, what years we can get what amounts of money. But I recognize that the security forces need the proper helicopters. The force in the field needs the proper helicopters. And the Huey's done a good job, but it's time for it to go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to shift and talk about our Guard and Reserve training. As we look to modernize many of our aging weapons, we want to make sure we don't neglect the readiness of our military families. Guardsmen and reservists often travel hundreds of miles to and from their duty locations every month. Most are not reimbursed for the costs they incur and are limited as to what they can claim as business-related expenses. I think that's flat out wrong. Service members should not be taxed on money they spend to subsidize their own training. This afternoon, I'll be introducing the Tax Relief for Guard and Reserve Training Act, which will allow Guardsmen and reservists to deduct travel expenses, including meals and lodging, to ensure they aren't penalized for serving their country. General Dunford, can you speak to the unique challenges that Guardsmen and reservists face on drill weekends that you observed during your 40 years in uniform?
Senator, I can. You know, obviously not personally. My brother did spend 20 years in the reserves. I had an opportunity to see him, and obviously the men and women that I visit with routinely. And they do have a unique challenge. I even tell them when I'm speaking to them, I said, you know, I only have one thing I have to worry about, which is being a full-time active duty. You've got to be a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, whatever you're doing in your personal life, and you're trying to balance the family. So I think when they give up a week, 2 weeks, a month, when they go on deployment for a year and they set aside their civilian employment, I think they do have some unique challenges, and I appreciate your interest in making sure that we can mitigate some of the consequences of those challenges.
Great. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator. We now recognize the distinguished senator from Montana.
Back to back.
Mr. Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Mattis, good to see you again. Appreciate our conversation last week. And it goes without saying, thank you for your service and your willingness to continue to serve. Like you, I fully support ensuring that our troops have everything they need to make this nation safe. The President's budget, however, goes about it in what I believe is the wrong way. While gutting the budgets of other agencies critical to preventing conflict, the President's budget continues a trend of putting military operations on a credit card, and it ultimately forces our kids and grandkids to pay for this increase. And we should certainly not take away food from our seniors who are hungry to pay for increased military activity across the globe. Some folks equate American military interventions with American leadership. For the record, I do not. In my opinion, our nation's strength isn't only reflected by the size and capability of our military, it's also reflected in the strength of our schools, our healthcare system, our nation's infrastructure. Our strength is reflected in our economic security and national security, as you have already pointed out. And it's about time that our priorities, investments, and conversations reflect that reality. I want to dovetail on just a little bit of what Senator Dane said. It has to do with the helicopters that are coming in to Malmstrom Air Force Base. He's pointed out these are Vietnam-era helicopters that we currently are using, far past their expected time of usefulness. And we were told for time and time again on this committee that they would be replaced by 2019. I just heard you say that they would probably move to 2021. Now, I believe if I went back and looked at my notes, they were probably due to be in long before 2019 even. We've worked on Milcon construction, making sure they've got the housing. We got that done, so we're ready for them. I checked back on what we did last budgetary cycle. We actually plussed up the President's request for replacement on this committee. And it was due to the work, I believe, that Senator Daines and I and other members in this committee that were able to do that. The question is it really money, or is it the procurement process, or is it something else that we need to fix to make sure those helicopters get there? Because quite frankly, it's important.
Well, it's absolutely important, sir, for the rotation of the crews, the launch crews, and as well as the security forces. I can't tell you how we got into this position in past years. I can tell you that the impact of budget sequestration ripples through everything we do. And not always do we maintain the process that we come up and testify on when other dynamic issues intrude. And now we've got an alarm on keeping our B-52s in the air. We've got an alarm on ships that can't go to sea, and we have to back up and reprogram, and all the chaos that, again, is a ripple coming out of a budget process I think has frustrated the House and the Senate as much as it's frustrated the Department of Defense and our military services. But I intend to have this solved, sir.
Okay.
And I'll work it.
Well, I would just tell you that, and I know you guys need continuity in budgets for predictability, and it's really the only way you can plan for the future. But we budgeted around sequestration last year. We took it off the table. We're going to have to do it again. And then we plussed up
what the president was asking for. And so I would just ask you to take a look at that. You're a solid man, and I know you're in it for all the right reasons, and I just bring this up just to make sure that it's on your radar screen. On Saturday, President Trump tweeted that Germany owes vast sums of money to NATO and the United States. I've been arguing for years that we need our NATO allies to contribute more, that we can't continue to fund the whole ball of wax. We have shared security priorities with our friends in Europe. In your opinion, are we owed money by Germany and other NATO allies for our military presence in Europe?
Sir, the alliance owes full commitment by each member nation. I cannot give you an accounting for past money owed, because that's not the way we do that in NATO. We do it through capabilities. That's the commitment each nation makes. However, we are seeing Germany is committed to going to the 2%. That's been reinforced by their Minister of Defense when I spoke with her, and also by the Chancellor. And I think they're on the right track to lead the development of 2% budgets across the alliance. Right now, there's 5 nations making it. I anticipate 4 more in the next 12 months, and we'll see more nations coming online, assuming their economies can hold together the way they are right now or improve.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator. The senator's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the distinguished senator from Kansas, Mr. Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you both on behalf of Kansans for your service to our nation. You both in your testimony, in your written testimony, talk about the threats of a number of threats, but one of them that you both mention is Russia. I want to focus a moment on Russia and its role in Syria. We have learned within the last week, it's become clear that an organization, a militia group called Syrian Kurdish YPG militia, have formed a bilateral relationship with Russia in the process of building some kind of military facility in northwest Syria. This, I believe, is one of the groups that we are supporting in our assist and train funding efforts. Your budget request includes an additional $600 million for the Counter-ISIS Train and Equip Fund that I believe includes funding for this organization. My question is both broad and specific. What do you see the role of Russia in our efforts to have success in Syria, and how do we make certain that the money that we provide to militia groups in support of that effort, what kind of consequence is there with a relationship to Russia?
Very quickly, sir, I'll let the chairman address this specific group. The YPG has actually got 2 different areas. One of them, the Afrin Kurds, is the one that you're referring to, that Russia has developed a relationship with. But right now, we're at a position to have deconfliction with Russia. We do not coordinate with Russia. But let me let the chairman get into the details of your specific question there.
Thank you, Secretary.
Senator, I can confirm for you that the specific group that's being supported by the Russians is not a group that has received training, equipment, resources from us in the northwest part of Syria. And to the Secretary's point, we're very clear that we don't have political alignment with Russia in Syria, so at the military level, and we're also very clear as to what the NDAA specifies with regard to not being able to cooperate with Russia. So on the ground in Syria right now, what we're working very hard to do is just make sure that our people on the ground are safe, that our aviators are safe, and that we're able to prosecute the campaign in Syria, deconflicting our operations with those being conducted by Russia. In the specific groups that we do provide support to and the ones that we have asked to provide additional support to, we do have a very detailed vetting process that we use to mitigate the risk of that weapons or equipment falling in the wrong hands.
What about the relationship between those groups that we may assist and their relationship with Russia? Is that a component of the vetting process?
It is a component of the vetting process, Senator, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. The group that we are supporting, certainly at the political level, has been engaged in Russia. The YPG has a political office in Moscow itself. but the groups that we're providing support to on the ground are not being supported directly by Russian military forces.
Thank you. We'd be expecting a report, a strategy from the Department of Defense in regard to our efforts in Syria. Is that soon forthcoming?
It is, Senator. We've got the skeleton plan put together. We're fleshing it out. It's an interagency developed report where it embraces economic, diplomatic, military, covert means. And we should have this done in the next couple of months, if that long. It may not even take us another month, but we're still putting it together, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This budget amendment includes some military construction funding that we're anxious to also take a look at in our subcommittee. One of those areas that you are requesting funding is a military construction project at Guantanamo Bay that is designed to redesign a new barracks for our enlisted men and women. Men, I believe, in this case, for the detention operations at Guantanamo Bay. Would you like to highlight the value of why those dollars are included in this request and what they mean? We had a Kansas National Guard unit that deployed to Gitmo for providing security services. A long list of military officials have decried the condition of the facilities at Guantanamo Bay, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to make certain that we know why that's included and its value.
Senator, I've in the last few months been down to visit our men and women down in Guantanamo Bay, and as you can appreciate, I think that's probably as arduous and as demanding work as we have going on inside the Department of Defense. And they are living in facilities that are old, well past their time, and I believe that for right now, we do need to provide them with suitable living facilities and a new barracks. For that reason, is part of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And the chair now recognizes the distinguished senator from Hawaii, Mr. Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mattis, thank you for being here. I'd like to follow up on a couple of questions that were asked earlier in the hearing. Can you walk me through what a 28% cut to the Department of State would mean for the Department of Defense?
Just off the top of my head, sir, it would probably replicate what's been going on with the department for several years in terms of the impact on readiness and why I'm here in front of you right now, a 28% cut to the Department of Defense.
Excuse me, a 28% cut to the State Department, which is being proposed by the administration,
right.
how that would impact your department?
That I can't quantify right now, so I'd have to look at the specific programs being cut and try to translate that into impact on our operations. I would have to look at it. I have not looked at it line by line to see which programs are being cut and what might be the impact.
Let me ask the question another way. How critical is your partnership with the Department of State in terms of, for instance, the Asia-Pacific rebalance?
Senator, I work very closely with Secretary Tillerson. We get together at least once a week. We're on the phone 3-4 times a week. His officers, Foreign Service officers, are in our building helping us craft policy. It's absolutely a team effort as we tie diplomacy and military means together. So when we walk into the national security staff meetings, state and defense are aligned. So it's a critical team effort, and we intend to keep it that way.
OMB has put us on a course for some substantial cuts to the Coast Guard, and I'm wondering whether you can talk about the partnership between the Coast Guard and the Department of Defense. And my own judgment is that the Coast Guard is incorrectly categorized as non-defense spending when at least some portion of it are certainly expenditures that are in partnership with the Department of Defense, and I'd like you to flesh that out for me.
Senator, the Coast Guard's efforts, for example, in maritime control along our coasts, beyond search and rescue. I'm talking about interdiction of drugs, interdiction of human trafficking, and certainly in the cases like in the Arab Gulf, the Persian Gulf, where the Coast Guard vessels are deployed alongside our Navy vessels. It's a good team. We need them for the special role they have, which includes law enforcement. As you know, we don't do those kind of things, arrest, that sort of thing. If we have to do that with a U.S. Navy ship, we bring law enforcement teams from the Coast Guard on board our ships to maintain that red line that the U.S. military not engage in that kind of activity. So it's a good relationship. It's a strong relationship in terms of cross-fertilization and looking out for America's interest. But I hope that answers your question.
It does. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your first, if not maybe one of your first overseas trips as Secretary to be in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you for your clear reassurance to our allies and your message to our adversaries in the region. The Asia-Pacific Stability Initiative is something Senator McCain has put forward to support PACOM's needs in the face of Chinese military modernization. And I'm wondering if you can talk about whether you support the idea and how that's impacting your 2018 planning.
Senator, the Asia-Pacific region will be a priority region. We obviously have worldwide responsibilities, but we have 5 states that are Pacific Ocean states, have coastlines there, and we have interests that endure in the Pacific. The reason I made my first overseas trip out there was based on CIA estimates of where we faced the biggest immediate challenge, and to reassure our allies that we were with them, I thought was necessary at that point. I fully support what I've read. I don't understand all the details in Senator McCain's plan, but I support the themes that he outlined and the importance he assigns to that region.
In the interest of time, I'll submit this one for the record. I'd just like your view on whether we're still on track with EDCA, given the politics in the Philippines, but your ability to retain a relationship with the defense minister in the Philippines as well.
Yes,
thank you.
The time of the senator has expired. The chair now recognizes the distinguished senator from Alaska, Ms. Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary General Dunford, welcome and thank you for your leadership. First question is directed to you, Secretary Mattis, regarding the F-35s and the bed down in Eielson near Fairbanks, Alaska. This is the first F-35 basing location in PACAV. We're anticipating the receipt of those F-35s in 2020. The military construction has been appropriated, but the procurement dollars for the F-35 buy have not yet been appropriated. Can you tell me what the plan is to budget for the procurement of the 54 F-35s that are coming to Eielson, and do you anticipate any impediments to a timely bed down?
Senator, there are F-35s in this additional budget request, but I'm going to have to take that for the record and get back to you on those specific airframes that will support that one unit. I don't know that right now, but I'll get back to you on that.
I would appreciate clarification there, as I'm sure you're aware, the folks in the interior are following this very, very carefully and just wanting to ensure that we are on track with the timing. I'd like to also raise a question regarding Russia, as several of my colleagues have. General Dunford, you, during your confirmation hearings back in 2015, you indicated at that time, and I quote, that if you want to talk about a nation that could pose an existential threat to the United States, you would have to point to Russia. And at that time, you characterized their behavior as nothing short of alarming. Of course, we in Alaska are watching our neighbors to the east very carefully. We got 57 miles that separate Alaska from Russia over the Bering Straits. And we're concerned by what we see as military buildup there in the Russian Far East. So This morning, I would ask a question as to whether or not you still see Russia's behavior as alarming. What do you make of the military activities in the Arctic? And then if you can speak to the issue in the Arctic of defense cooperation in certain areas, certainly in the areas of search and rescue. That is something that, as the Arctic nations are working and collaborating, we look to that as an opportunity. But again, you've got a tension, if you will, between what we see as the military buildup juxtaposed to the other issues that we're facing in the Arctic.
Senator, thank you. First, on my overall assessment of Russia, my assessment of their capabilities and their behavior haven't changed since 2015. In fact, I think if you look at our request here in 17, and I think anticipating what we'll ask for in 18, 19, and 20, a good part of it is benchmarked against Russia as a peer competitor in the areas of cyberspace, maritime capability, undersea warfare, electronic warfare, and the full range of capabilities. So my assessment hasn't changed. In terms of what they're trying to do, I think they're trying to do two simple things. At the strategic level, they're trying to undermine the credibility of our alliances and our ability to meet our alliance commitments. And secondly, when you look at their military capabilities, whether it be in the Arctic or in Europe, what they're trying to do is prevent us from being able to move military power into the region or operate freely within the region. Again, connected to our ability to meet our alliance commitments. So I think they're very clear about what our strength is, which is our allies and partners and our ability to project power when and where needed to advance our national interests. And I look at their political activity, you know, what we really call adversarial competition that has a military dimension, but it falls short of warfare. So as they combine economic coercion, political influence, unconventional warfare, cyber capabilities, it gets after, again, trying to erode our allies. And then when we look at their military posture, whether it be in the Arctic or in Europe, it keeps us from, their intent is to keep us from projecting power. I do see increasing concern by Arctic nations to work together to mitigate the effects of Russian capability development and behavior. And I think the importance that we place on the Arctic is reflected in the fact the Department rewrote the strategy for the Arctic in 2013. And I think without Lee turning to Secretary's defense guidance that he'll give us soon, I anticipate that the Arctic will be a critical part of that.
Well, my time has expired, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman, I would submit a question to you, Secretary Mattis, along the same lines of the interest in the Arctic, the investments in the Arctic in terms of equipment necessary to defend the country in this very changing and very dynamic world up north. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We now recognize the distinguished senator from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome, Mr. Secretary General Dunford. You've received several questions already about the partnership between state and defense and the potential impact on the Defense Department with regard to cuts that are contemplated at this point in the State Department. I want to look at that a little more closely, and I want to start with General Dunford. Part of the mission of Operation Inherent Resolve is to enable whole-of-coalition government action to increase regional stability, defeat the ideology of ISIL, and stem the global flow of foreign fighters. According to that mission statement, that means enabling America and coalition nations to counter ISIL with the full might of their national power. And here I'm quoting directly, including diplomatic, informational, economic, law enforcement, and other aspects of national power. So, General Dunford, in your professional military judgment, would it be strategically wise to reduce funding and staffing levels for civilian agencies like state and USAID? And as we review these budgets, can you point out any particularly important aspects of the partnership in the fight against ISIL that we should keep a close eye on in terms of fighting maybe to restore some of the funding that's been proposed to be cut?
Senator, thanks. First of all, with regard to ISIS, we really have 9 areas that we've identified that are critical to our strategy. And although we're in the process of revising our strategy, I think the relative distribution of labor across the government won't change. The Department of Defense leads on 2 of those 9, and other elements of the government lead. And you identified some areas where the State Department or other elements of our government will lead. But if you look at what must be done to deal with the ISIS threat, we do have to deal with the flow of foreign fighters. We do have to address the resources. We do have to undermine the credibility of the narrative. Those are 3 of the most important tasks. And the lead for dealing with all of those 3 are other elements of the government. And although I can't talk to the adequate levels of funding for any other element of the government, what I can say is that in order for us to be successful against ISIS or any of the threats that we face right now, it will be important for us to fully leverage all the capabilities our nation has, diplomatically, economically, and militarily, and now in the 21st century in the information space as well.
I know that the policy is under revision, but can you tick off really quickly the 9, the 2 elements of defense and the other 7?
Sure. Good governance is one. Dealing with foreign fighters is another. Addressing the resources is another. Dealing with the narrative is another. Building the capacity of our partners on the ground is another. Denying the enemy sanctuary is another. And then the economic tools that we have would be the last.
Okay. Thank you. Secretary Mattis, you've also, from Senator Udall, had a question already about the lack of an ISIL-specific authorization of use of military force. Nonetheless, you are in the process of revising, if you haven't already concluded the process of revising the elements of the operation to defeat ISIL. Can you give us details of how you plan to spend the $2 billion that you are requesting specifically for acceleration of the defeat of ISIS? For example, can you give us any early detail about additional troops that you would be sending to Iraq and Syria with this funding? And I recognize that some things need to be shared in closed settings, in classified settings. But I do think it is important, especially if you're encouraging us to engage in public debate about a new authorization of use of military force, which, by the way, I support and criticize the previous administration for not pursuing that more aggressively. So some information then does need to be shared in an open setting in order for us to have that debate.
Senator Baldwin, when I leave here today, I go over to Foggy Bottom, where Secretary Tillerson has 68 nations senior representatives, his counterparts gathered, where we're talking about the very issues you've just brought up. We're talking about how we're actually going to orchestrate the international community's efforts against them. When you switch over to the AUMF issue, again, I think a firm statement by the U.S. Congress would hearten our allies as well as give our troops a sense of purpose. On the $2 billion, I would tell you that we're going to confront the enemy with an increased number of fights in various locations so they have cascading problems to collapse them as quickly as possible. The idea being right now, Senator, that they have imminent operations to attack our allies and overseas. In other words, what they call their external operations. We intend to throw them on their back foot. And as far as any additional troops, I would have to see the specific military problem where working by, with, and through allies, it requires our troops. but I'm not at that point right now. The few troops who've been added have been for fire support or for monitoring, that sort of thing. These are the kind of things that only we can do, at least with the kind of timeline we're on right now. But they're not there permanently. We remain with a by, with, and through our allies approach. This money will permit us to accelerate the operations I just referenced, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
The time of the senator has expired. The chair recognizes the distinguished senator from South Carolina, Mr.
Thank you,
Graham.
Mr. Chairman. The Marine Corps should be honored. It speaks well of the Marine Corps that both of you are here. Get through as much as we can. I know we just have 5 minutes. If you were going to do an authorization to use military force, General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, by the Congress, would you suggest that we limit the authorization to a particular period of time?
No, Senator, I do not.
What about geography? We can only fight the enemy in certain places.
Senator, due to the nature of this enemy's threat, that would only work to help the enemy.
And take means off the table. Take away from you the ability to deploy means. How you would fight them?
Senator, I think it would be best if the Congress would say what they want us to accomplish, and we bring back. I have no reservation about sharing and in closed session with you how we would carry that out.
Gotcha. So my view is if you want to destroy ISIL, you shouldn't limit yourself to time, geography, or means. You should just destroy them. To destroy them, do you agree that soft power is an essential ingredient in winning the war on terror, both of you?
Sir, America's got two fundamental powers, the power of intimidation and the power of inspiration. Soft power is largely found in the power of inspiration, and it's part and parcel of how we defeat this enemy.
Do you agree with that, General Dunford?
I do, Senator, and at the end of the day, we're involved in a war of ideas, and undermining the credibility of the narrative of the threat is going to be critical to our success, and I think that's been defined as soft power.
I admire you both because it's true. You'll never win this war just by killing terrorists. You have to do more, in my view. Let's look forward in Iraq. The day that Mosul falls, and I'm sure it will, would you support a residual force staying in Iraq to make sure that ISIL doesn't come back if the Iraqis would accept one, General Mattis, Secretary Mattis?
Sir, I believe it's in our national interest that we keep the Iraqi security forces in a position to keep our enemies on their back foot, our mutual enemies on their back foot.
General Dunford?
I agree with that, Senator Graham, and I believe that the Iraqi security forces clearly going to need that kind of support for some time to come.
I heard from the Iraqi Prime Minister yesterday to reconstruct Anbar province and now Mosul is about $50 billion. Do you agree, just as important to having troops there as a residual force, we should probably come up with a game plan to reconstruct Iraq so that we'd have leverage in Baghdad, not just troops, but an assistance plan for the Iraqis?
Senator, Secretary Tillerson's meeting today does address this issue. It's going to be an international effort. It should not be carried wholly by the U.S. taxpayer.
But we should be part of it.
Certainly be part of it. Yes.
Do you believe it's in the taxpayers' interest for us to stay involved in Iraq in terms of reconstruction, to regain influence that we may have lost in Baghdad?
I don't see any reason to pull out again and find the same lesson.
Agree with that, General Dunford?
I do agree, Senator, that we need to remain decisively engaged in Iraq and in the region.
Do both of you agree that we should lift BCA caps on defense spending forever?
I have seen no value to the BCA caps in the past years, so I certainly wouldn't take issue, Senator.
I think I can concur with that without hesitation, Senator.
Is it fair to say that the sequestration has done a lot of damage to our military capabilities and readiness?
It has done more damage to our readiness, sir, than the enemies in the field.
Senator, has, and it's not only done damage to our readiness, but I think it's also been a very inefficient use of the resources that the taxpayers have given us.
Well, I'm glad y'all didn't beat around the bush. 2018 is 603 for defense by the Trump administration. Senator McCain has a defense budget of 640. Who's right? General Mattis?
Sure, if you think I'm going to
expect that correctness I got just a minute ago.
I think I'm going to pick a fight with the chairman of the Senate Armed Services
Well,
Committee.
let's put it this way. No, I don't. I wouldn't want to do that myself. The point is that more defense spending is needed, but what are the limitations on increased defense spending?
Sir, we have to make certain what we ask for is executable and that we can sustain it. But what I need to do, Senator, is complete the strategy review that I'm doing right now so I can come to you with a compelling reason why the American people have to sacrifice this money out of their pocket to national defense.
General Dunford, in 10 seconds, you can take a little longer. Don't you agree that we need a budget based on the threats of today, the potential threats of tomorrow, to win the wars we may engage in, and deter wars that we may never have to fight? That's what the budget should be about, not a number.
Senator, I agree. And the one thing that we owe you, in the context of the previous question is, and I work very close with the Secretary to make sure this is exactly what we deliver, is we owe you the right prioritization of capabilities that we need to have within the top line that we've been given in the context of exactly the dynamic you just described.
And both of you feel we can spend $30 billion wisely between now and the end of September?
We do, sir.
Senator, I'm confident we can.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you all, our distinguished panel of witnesses and members of the committee and staffs who've helped us with this hearing. We hope that you will respond to any written questions that we may have as follow-up following the hearing today. We would request that you would respond to such a request in a reasonable time. Until then, the Defense Subcommittee will reconvene on Wednesday, March 29 at 10:30 a.m. to receive testimony on the Defense Health Program. Until then, the subcommittee stands in recess.